The air in the grand ballroom of the Astor was thick with the scent of money and lilies. Tech titan Gideon Price, a man who could bend markets with a single tweet, stood at the podium, bathed in a golden spotlight. His wife of 12 years, Ophelia, watched from the head table, a perfect portrait of grace in sapphire silk. But a few seats away sat Brielle Calloway, young, ambitious, and the real reason for the sparkle in Gideon's eye. The city's elite held their breath, champagne flutes paused mid-air. They were about to witness a toast. What they didn't know was that they were about to witness a demolition. Because while Gideon prepared to publicly celebrate his future, his wife was just seconds away from detonating his past. The event was called the Pinnacle Gala, a self-congratulatory monument to Gideon Price's latest triumph. His company, Aura Dynamics, had just secured a multi-billion-dollar government contract to overhaul national infrastructure logistics using its proprietary AI. The Astor's Grand Ballroom had been transformed into a futuristic wonderland. Holographic data streams drifted lazily beneath the crystal chandeliers, and the ice sculptures were carved into the shape of the Aura Dynamics logo. It was like Gideon himself, spectacularly successful and utterly devoid of subtlety. Ophelia Fairchild Price sat at the head table, a fixed, serene smile on her face. It was a smile she had perfected over years of practice, a mask of placid elegance that betrayed none of the tectonic shifts occurring beneath the surface. To her left, her husband Gideon was holding court. He was a handsome man, his features sharpened by ambition rather than age. His custom-tailored suit unable to fully contain the restless energy that radiated from him. He laughed, a booming sound that commanded attention, slapping the back of a portly senator. Ophelia's gaze drifted past him to the other side of the table. There sat Brielle Calloway. Brielle was Aura's head of strategic marketing, a title Gideon had invented for her 6 months ago. She was 28, with eyes the color of whiskey and a razor-sharp bob that framed a face of breathtaking modern beauty. She was leaning forward, her crimson dress a slash of defiance against the ballroom's cool blue lighting, listening to Gideon with an intensity that was almost devotional. She was, Ophelia knew, with the cold certainty of a final diagnosis, the other woman. It hadn't been a single dramatic discovery. There was no lipstick on a collar, no late-night text message accidentally seen. It had been a slow creeping realization, an erosion of intimacy that began years ago. It started with Gideon's dismissal of her ideas. Ophelia held a doctorate in computational linguistics from MIT, a fact Gideon once touted with pride, but now treated as a quaint historical footnote. Her thesis on predictive modeling had been the seed from which Aura Dynamics had sprouted a truth they had both quietly buried under the mountain of his success. The signs grew more concrete over the last year. The business trips to places with 5-star resorts and no discernible business. The second phone, which he called his burner for headhunters, that buzzed with alarming frequency. The way he looked at Brielle in board meetings, the same way he had once looked at Ophelia, as if she were the only person in a universe of his own creation. The final, irrefutable proof had come not from a private investigator, but from their own financial statements. Ophelia, a woman who could deconstruct a fraudulent corporate ledger as easily as she could read a novel, had found it. A shell corporation, BC Consulting LLC, had been receiving 6-figure payments from a discretionary fund Gideon controlled. The registered agent for the LLC was Brielle Calloway. The funds were used to lease a penthouse apartment on the Upper East Side, a place Ophelia had never seen. That discovery 3 months ago had not broken her. It had galvanized her. The grief was real. A hollow ache in her chest for the man she had loved and the future they were supposed to build. But beneath the grief was a harder, colder substance, resolve. She had not confronted him. She had not cried or screamed. She had called Lorraine Adler, a divorce attorney, so famously formidable that her name was spoken in hushed, fearful tones in the city's most exclusive country clubs. So Ophelia Samain, Lorraine had said in their first meeting, Her office, a Spartan space of steel and glass overlooking Central Park. "What is it you want?" Ophelia had looked out the window at the sprawling city Gideon believed he owned. "I want what's mine," she had said, her voice steady. "And I don't just mean the money, I mean the credit. I want my name back on the foundation he built over it." For the next 90 days, Ophelia lived a double life. By day, she was the dutiful Mrs. Price, hosting charity luncheons and smiling for the society pages. By night, she and Lorraine's team of forensic accountants and legal eagles were meticulously disassembling Gideon's empire brick by digital brick. They traced every dollar, every email, every line of charm. They found the original source code from her thesis, barely altered, watermarked in the metadata of Aura's core software. It was the smoking gun. Now, sitting in the grand ballroom, she felt a strange calm. The string had been pulled. The mechanism was in motion. She looked at Gideon, now rising from his chair and moving toward the podium, and felt not hatred, but a distant pity. He was a brilliant, driven man who had become so consumed by the myth of his own creation that he had forgotten it was a collaboration. He saw her as a beautiful accessory, a relic of his humbler beginnings. He had no idea she was the architect of the entire edifice. The room fell silent as Gideon tapped the microphone. The spotlight intensified, bleaching all color from his face, except for the triumphant gleam in his eyes. "Thank you, everyone." He began, his voice resonating with practiced charisma. "Thank you for being here to celebrate this milestone for Aura Dynamics and for our city." He went through the perfunctory thank yous, the mayor, the senators, the board members. Ophelia watched her hands resting calmly in her lap. He was saving her for last, as was his custom. It was part of the performance, the final gracious nod to the supportive wife. "And of course," he said, turning his head slightly in her direction, a practiced smile playing on his lips, "I have to thank my incredible wife, Ophelia, for her patience, for her grace, and for making our house a home while I was out building the future." A polite, lukewarm applause rippled through the room. It was a dismissive, patronizing tribute, and they all knew it. He had reduced her 12 years of partnership, her intellectual contribution, her emotional labor, to interior decorating. Ophelia's serene smile didn't waver. She gave a small, regal nod. Gideon turned back to the crowd, his energy visibly lifting. The obligatory part was over. Now for the real speech. "But a company isn't just about the person at the top," he continued, his voice taking on a new passion. "It's about vision. It's about disruption. It's about having people on your team who don't just see the future, but who grab it by the throat. And there is one person in particular who embodies that spirit more than anyone I have ever met." Ophelia's eyes flicked to Brielle. The younger woman was looking up at Gideon, her face a mask of rapt adoration. A faint, knowing smile touched her lips. This was her moment. "When I was looking to revolutionize our brand, to tell our story, not just to the markets, but to the world, I knew I needed a fire starter, a true visionary." Gideon's gaze locked onto Brielle's. The entire room turned with him. The spotlight might as well have been on her. "Brielle Calloway," Gideon said, his voice ringing with genuine, unvarnished admiration. "In less than a year, she has transformed Aura's public face. She has more passion, more drive, and more brilliant insight in a single day than most people find in a lifetime. She is the engine behind our new narrative. She is in many ways the very soul of the new Aura Dynamics." A wave of uncomfortable silence washed over the ballroom. It was one thing to have a mistress. It was another thing entirely to toast her in front of your wife at a gala, celebrating your shared success. It was an act of supreme, breathtaking arrogance. Whispers erupted like brushfires at the surrounding tables. The senator beside Ophelia shifted awkwardly in his seat. Gideon, high on his own rhetoric, was oblivious. "She is the future," he declared, raising his glass. To those who build, to those who dare, and to those who inspire. To Brielle. He drank deeply. A smattering of confused, obligatory applause followed. Brielle, blushing under the intense scrutiny, raised her own glass in a small, triumphant gesture toward Gideon. Ophelia didn't move. She didn't clap. She simply watched the entire exchange, her expression unreadable. She felt the slow, steady vibration of her phone in her clutch. She glanced down. It was a single text message from a number she had memorized. Adler, ETA. 1 minute. Stage is yours. Ophelia took a deliberate, calming breath. She placed her napkin neatly on the table, stood up and smoothed down her sapphire dress. Every eye in the room, which had been darting between Gideon Brielle and her, was now fixed on her alone. Gideon, finally sensing the shift in the room's atmosphere, looked over at her with a flicker of annoyance. Ophelia, what are you doing? She didn't answer him. Her gaze was fixed on the grand entrance to the ballroom. Just as Gideon took a step toward her, a confused frown on his face, the towering oak doors swung open. But it wasn't a late-arriving guest. Framed in the doorway stood 2 men in severe dark suits, flanking a woman with silver hair cut in a sharp, intimidating bob. It was Lorraine Adler, holding a thick, leather-bound portfolio. The murmurings in the ballroom died instantly, replaced by a shocked collective intake of breath. The air crackled with a new terrifying electricity. Behind them, through the open doors, visible to everyone in the room, was the sleek black nose of a Lincoln Continental limousine pulled right up onto the manicured curb, its engine purring like a patient predator. Lorraine Adler's eyes scanned the room, bypassing the senators and CEOs, and landed directly on Gideon Price. She took a measured step forward, her heels clicking with chilling authority on the marble floor. The toast was over. The real main event was about to begin. The silence in the Astor's grand ballroom was a physical entity. It pressed in on the eardrums heavier than the most bombastic orchestral score. 200 of New York's most powerful people sat frozen, their faces a gallery of shock, confusion, and dawning rapturous delight at the unfolding drama. Gideon Price stood paralyzed at the podium, his champagne flute still in his hand, looking from the imposing figures at the door to his wife, who now stood, with the serene posture of a queen, surveying her court. Lorraine Adler moved with the unhurried grace of a shark that knows its prey is cornered. Her 2 associates, broad-shouldered men with the impassive faces of federal agents, followed a half-step behind their presence, a clear message of non-negotiable seriousness. They didn't scan the crowd. Their focus was a laser beam pointed at the head table. Gideon's mind, usually a whirlwind of stock tickers and strategic acquisitions, struggled to process the scene. Lorraine Adler. Here. He knew who she was. Every billionaire in the city knew who she was. She was the woman you hired when you wanted to leave your spouse with nothing but their designer luggage. She was the woman whose name was a synonym for corporate evisceration. Why was she walking into his gala? Ophelia, he said again, his voice a low, dangerous growl. The charismatic leader was gone, replaced by the cornered oligarch. What is this? Ophelia finally turned her gaze to him. Her eyes, which for years had reflected only placid support, were now as cold and clear as ice. There was no anger, no pain, just an unnerving absolute finality. I believe they're here for you, Gideon, she said, her voice calm and carrying easily in the profound silence. Lorraine Adler reached the head table. She didn't acknowledge the gaping senators or the wide-eyed board members. She walked directly to where Gideon stood, her path forcing a stunned Brielle Calloway to lean back in her chair. Lorraine placed the heavy leather portfolio on the white linen tablecloth with a soft but definitive thud. Mr. Gideon Price, she asked, though it was clearly not a question. Her voice was like gravel and silk, polished but unbreakable. Gideon stared at her, then at the portfolio. "Who the hell are you to interrupt my event?" Lorraine allowed a small cold smile. "My name is Lorraine Adler. I am legal counsel for Ophelia Fairchild Price." She gestured with a perfectly manicured hand toward the portfolio. "You are being served." The words hung in the air, each one a perfectly weighted stone dropped into a still pond. Served. The whispers that had been silenced now erupted into a tidal wave of hushed gossip. Phones previously forbidden were subtly raised, their camera lenses gleaming in the low light. The society columnist from the New York Ledger, a woman named Beatrice Fairfax, who had been documenting the Price's perfect marriage for years, looked as though she'd just been handed the Pulitzer Prize on a silver platter. One of Lorraine's associates, a man built like a bank vault, stepped forward. With a swift, practiced motion, he unclasped the portfolio, drew out a thick stack of documents bound with a pale blue ribbon, and placed them directly in front of Gideon. "Summons and complaint for dissolution of marriage," the man said, his voice a flat, emotionless monotone. "Petition for temporary restraining order against transfer of assets and a notice of lis pendens against all shared real property." Each legal term was another nail in the coffin of Gideon's carefully constructed reality. Dissolution of marriage. Divorce. The words seemed alien, impossible. He looked from the papers to Ophelia, his face a mask of disbelief and rising fury. "You're divorcing me," he sputtered the words, clumsy in his mouth. "You're divorcing me. Here now, are you insane?" "I thought the venue was appropriate," Ophelia replied, her voice still unnervingly calm. "You wanted to celebrate the soul of the new aura dynamics. I felt it was only fair to serve you with the consequences of that new soul, in front of the same audience." Her gaze flickered for a single devastating moment toward Brielle. The younger woman had gone pale, her whiskey-colored eyes wide with panic. The triumphant blush she had worn during Gideon's toast had vanished, replaced by the chalky pallor of a dawning, horrifying realization. She wasn't the future. She was the justification. She was the catalyst for a war she had no idea was being waged. Gideon's hand trembled as he reached for the papers. His fingers, which could sign billion-dollar deals without a tremor, fumbled with the ribbon. He stared at the top page, his own name printed in stark black ink opposite Ophelia's. Ophelia Fairchild Price, petitioner, versus Gideon Price, respondent. "This is a joke," he snarled, looking up at Ophelia, his eyes searching for a crack in her composure, a hint that this was some elaborate hysterical prank. He found nothing but polished steel. "After everything I've given you, the houses, the travel, the life you have nothing without me." It was the ultimate miscalculation, the fatal error from which there would be no recovery. He had voiced the lie he had told himself for a decade. Ophelia laughed. It wasn't a sound of mirth. It was a low, sharp, brittle sound, like ice cracking under pressure. "Given me," she said, taking a step closer. The entire room leaned in. "Gideon, you didn't give me a life. You built a life on the foundations of my work. You took my thesis, the core of my intellectual property, and you called it aura. You didn't give me a home. You decorated a cage with the profits from my ideas. And tonight, you stood on a stage built with that money, and you thanked me for my patience, while you lauded the woman you bought with it." Every word was precise, delivered with the clean, lethal efficiency of a surgeon's scalpel. She wasn't just airing dirty laundry. She was reading out the charges from a legal and moral indictment. The senator next to her coughed and abruptly stood up, muttering something about a prior engagement. His departure started a chain reaction. People began to discreetly, then urgently gather their belongings. The party was over. The spectacle was not. Gideon looked wildly around the room, seeing the averted eyes, the poorly concealed smirks of his rivals, the frantic texting. He saw his perfectly orchestrated evening, his monument to himself, crumbling into dust. He was no longer the master of the universe. He was a soap opera villain in a tuxedo. "You will regret this, Ophelia," he hissed, his voice low and venomous. "I will bury you. I will leave you with nothing. You have no idea who you're dealing with." Lorraine Adler stepped forward again. "Oh, I think she does Mr. Price," she interjected smoothly. "And I think it's you who is about to learn who you've been married to for the past 12 years. She gestured again to the papers. "You'll find our initial petition is quite thorough. It includes a full forensic accounting of your shared and corporate assets, including, of course, B Consulting LLC. At the mention of the shell company, Brielle made a small strangled sound. All color drained from her face. She looked at Gideon, her expression pleading, but he wasn't looking at her. He was staring at Ophelia, his face a thunderous mask of pure hatred. "Furthermore," Lorraine continued, her voice cutting through the chaos, "we have filed an emergency motion to have an independent auditor appointed to examine the intellectual property origins of the Aura Dynamics Core AI. We have extensive documentation." That was the kill shot. This wasn't about the affair anymore. This wasn't about the house in the Hamptons or the art collection. This was about the company, the foundation of his entire identity and fortune. Ophelia hadn't just come for alimony. She had come for the kingdom itself. Ophelia looked at Gideon one last time. There was nothing left to say. The performance was complete. With a poise that was breathtaking in its finality, she turned away from him, from the wreckage of the head table, and walked toward the ballroom doors. The crowd parted for her like she was Moses, and they were the Red Sea. They stared at her not with pity, but with a new grudging respect. She wasn't the spurned wife. She was a warrior. As she reached the entrance, one of Lorraine's associates held the door for her. She stepped out into the cool night air, not looking back. The black limousine was waiting its engine, a low, steady hum. The chauffeur, a man who had driven her to countless charity events, opened the door for her. She slid onto the cool leather seat. Lorraine Adler followed a moment later, getting in the opposite side. "Phase 1 complete," Lorraine said, her voice betraying the slightest hint of satisfaction. She clicked her briefcase shut. Ophelia stared out the window at the magnificent facade of the Astor, where the lights were beginning to flicker off, where inside the man who had so catastrophically underestimated her was just beginning to read the first chapter of his own ruin. She didn't feel triumphant. She didn't feel happy. She felt the quiet, hollow relief of a necessary amputation. "What's phase 2?" she asked, her voice quiet. Lorraine looked at her, a glimmer of admiration in her sharp eyes. "Phase 2, she said, is where we reclaim what's yours." The limousine pulled away from the curb, melting silently into the river of New York traffic, leaving the shambles of the Pinnacle Gala behind. The immediate aftermath inside the ballroom was pure chaos. Gideon Price, a man accustomed to being the center of gravity in any room, was now the epicenter of a social and professional earthquake. The moment Ophelia's limo disappeared, the pretense of politeness among the remaining guests evaporated. The air buzzed with frantic whispers, the discreet glow of phone screens illuminating faces painted with schadenfreude. His rivals, men he'd bested in bidding wars and poached talent from, were trying and failing to hide their grins. "Get them out!" Gideon roared, his voice cracking. He gestured wildly at the remaining guests, the journalists, anyone who was witnessing his humiliation. His personal security team, looking bewildered, began gently but firmly ushering people toward the exits. He finally turned his volcanic rage on the one person who hadn't fled Brielle. She was still sitting at the table, looking small and fragile in her blood-red dress, the divorce papers lying between them like a declaration of war. "What did you do?" he snarled, snatching up the papers. "What did you tell her?" "Nothing," Brielle cried, shrinking back. "Gideon, I swear I did nothing. I don't know how she found out about anything." "BC Consulting LLC." He spat the name of the shell company. How the hell does she know about that? That was between us and the accountants. I don't know, she repeated, tears welling in her eyes. The ambitious, confident marketing executive was gone, replaced by a terrified young woman who had just realized she was not a player in the game, but a pawn. She had mistaken Gideon's obsession for love, his lavish gifts for an investment in their future. She saw now that she was just an expensive, high-risk hobby, and the bills had just come due in the most public way imaginable. Gideon wasn't listening. He was pacing his mind, racing, cycling through denial rage and a sliver of cold, terrifying fear. Intellectual property audit. Those 4 words were more frightening than 100 divorce lawyers. He pulled out his phone, his thumb jabbing at the screen to call his own lawyer, a bulldog named Frank Napier, whose strategy was to scorch the earth and salt the fields. "Frank, we have a problem," Gideon barked into the phone. "A big one. Ophelia just served me. At the gala. No, I'm not kidding. And she's got Lorraine Adler." There was a pause on the other end of the line. The silence of a man who knows he's just been handed an unwinnable war. "And Frank," Gideon's voice dropped, becoming tight with dread. "She's going after the company. She's claiming she's behind the core IP." While Gideon scrambled to mount a defense, Ophelia was being driven through the quiet, lamplit streets of the city. The adrenaline of the confrontation was beginning to fade, leaving behind a profound exhaustion. She leaned her head against the cool glass of the window, the city lights blurring into streaks of gold and white. This campaign hadn't begun with anger, but with a quiet, devastating moment of clarity 4 months prior. It was a Tuesday night. Gideon was supposedly in Zurich for a banking conference. Ophelia was in their home library, a cavernous 2-story room filled with books she'd curated, but Gideon never read. She was trying to reconcile their quarterly finances, a task she still handled because, as Gideon often joked, she was the only one smart enough to understand the accountant's gibberish. It was there she saw it. An outgoing wire transfer for $70,000 from the Jeep discretionary fund to an entity she'd never heard of, BC Consulting LLC. It was coded as market research and strategy. It was sloppy, arrogant. Gideon had become so confident in her disinterest in her role as the passive supportive wife that he hadn't even bothered to hide it well. Her first instinct was a gut punch of pure, unadulterated pain. The clichés were clichés for a reason. Her hands grew cold. The room seemed to tilt on its axis. But then something else kicked in. The part of her that Gideon had long forgotten, the MIT-trained analyst, the logician, the problem solver. She didn't cry. She opened a new encrypted spreadsheet. With methodical precision, she started digging. Using her knowledge of their financial structures, she peeled back the layers of shell companies and offshore accounts. It took her 3 days. She found the incorporation documents for BC Consulting online. Registered agent Brielle Calloway. She found the payments stretching back 8 months, totaling over $500,000. She cross-referenced the dates of the larger payments with Gideon's travel schedule. A solo hiking trip in Aspen coincided with a $150,000 payment. A tech summit in Monaco, another $200,000. It was a perfect, damning ledger of his infidelity. But she didn't stop there. The betrayal wasn't just about the affair. It was deeper, more fundamental. The affair was merely a symptom of his ultimate disrespect for her as his partner. He had erased her from their own story, so she decided to rewrite it. She went to her old university lockbox and retrieved a dusty hard drive containing her doctoral thesis, Predictive Linguistic Frameworks for Dynamic Systems. She spent a week locked in her study, comparing her original algorithms and source code with the publicly available technical papers on the aerodynamics eye. The similarity was staggering. He had changed variable names, refactored some of the functions, and scaled it for commercial application, but the core logic, the elegant, revolutionary architecture that made Aura's AI so powerful, was hers. It was an intellectual theft on a colossal scale. He had taken her genius and put his name on it. That was the moment the grief turned to ice. That was the moment she picked up the phone and called Lorraine Adler. He didn't just cheat on me, Ophelia had explained in Lorraine's office, her voice devoid of emotion. He plagiarized my life's work and built an empire on it. The affair is leverage. The intellectual property is the war. Lorraine, who had seen every kind of marital betrayal, listened with growing intensity. This was not a standard high-net-worth divorce. This was a founder's dispute wrapped in a dissolution of marriage. They always get arrogant, Lorraine had mused, tapping a pen on her desk. They think the money makes them invincible. They forget who was in the trenches with them at the beginning. The next 3 months were a masterclass in strategic preparation. While Gideon was buying Brielle jewelry and flying her to Paris, Ophelia and Lorraine's team were assembling an arsenal. They hired a white-hat hacker to perform a deep forensic analysis of Aura's code, creating a report that showed line by line the direct lineage from Ophelia's thesis. They found early-stage emails from 12 years ago on a dormant server Ophelia still had access to, where she explained the concepts to Gideon, who clearly struggled to grasp the advanced mathematics. They also found an unlikely ally, Robert Finch, the chief financial officer of Aura Dynamics. He was a quiet, meticulous man in his late 50s, one of the first people Gideon had hired. He had always treated Ophelia with a profound respect that bordered on reverence. Lorraine's investigators discovered that Finch had repeatedly raised concerns with Gideon about the unorthodox payments to BC Consulting and had been summarily shut down. Lorraine arranged a discreet meeting with him. "Mr. Finch." Lorraine began sitting opposite him in a quiet coffee shop in a different borough. "You know why I've asked to meet you? You know what's happening?" Robert Finch looked her mired. "I suspected this day would come. I've known Gideon for 15 years. I watched him change. The money. It corroded him. Did you know where the original idea for the Aura AI came from?" Ophelia, who was also present, asked him quietly. Finch looked at her, his expression pained. "Mrs. Price, Ophelia. Yes, I was there in the beginning. I remember when he came to me with your thesis, said he was going to commercialize it. I never knew. He didn't credit you or structure a partnership. I just assumed." "You assumed he was an honorable man," Ophelia finished for him. "So did I. He's going to destroy the company fighting this." Finch said his loyalty to the business he helped build, warring with his conscience. "No," Ophelia stated firmly. "He is. I'm not. I don't want to destroy Aura Dynamics. I want to save it from him. I want my seat at the table, the one I should have had from the beginning." Finch took a deep breath. "What do you need from me?" In the limo, Ophelia closed her eyes. The pieces were all in place. The legal filing was not just a petition for divorce. It was a corporate coup d'etat. It laid out the financial infidelity alongside the intellectual property theft, weaving them into a single devastating narrative of fraud and betrayal. It was designed to force Gideon into an impossible position, fight the divorce, and risk exposing the fraudulent origins of his entire company to his shareholders and the government, or settle quickly and quietly, giving Ophelia everything she wanted. "He'll call Frank Napier," Ophelia said, opening her eyes. "He'll tell him to fight to burn it all down." "He will," Lorraine agreed, "and Frank will bluster and threaten for a few days. Then we will file our second motion, a request for a deposition under oath with Robert Finch. And we will leak an anonymous tip along with page 47 of our forensic report to Beatrice Fairfax at the Ledger." Ophelia nodded. Page 47 was the most damning piece of the code comparison, a side-by-side view so obvious a layman could understand it. The limousine pulled up to a discreet luxury hotel where Ophelia had already checked in under her maiden name Fairchild. Her life at the palatial townhouse she shared with Gideon was over. As she stepped out of the car, She felt a pang of loss for the home she had made, for the life she had once believed in. But it was fleeting. She was not homeless. She was liberated. She was not a victim seeking revenge. She was a founder coming to claim her company. Gideon's toast praising his mistress hadn't been the cause of this war. It had simply been the starting pistol she was waiting for him to fire himself. The day after the Pinnacle Gala, the story exploded. Beatrice Fairfax's column in the New York Ledger ran with the headline, "Price of Success. Tech Titan served divorce papers. Mid-gala after toasting. Company soulmate." The article was a masterpiece of savage society reporting, detailing the opulent setting, Gideon's hubristic speech, Ophelia's icy departure, and the dramatic arrival of the infamous Lorraine Adler. The internet feasted on it. Memes of Gideon's shocked face went viral. #Pinnacle Gala and #Toast to the Mistress were trending worldwide. Gideon, holed up in his empty penthouse, which suddenly felt more like a mausoleum, was apoplectic. His PR team was in full-blown crisis mode. They advised him to remain silent, but silence was not in Gideon's nature. Control was. He decided to launch a counter-offensive. He gave an exclusive interview to a sympathetic business journal, spinning a carefully crafted narrative. Ophelia, he claimed, was a woman who had grown distant, unable to cope with the pressures of his success. The divorce was a tragic but private matter that her unstable and aggressive actions had forced into the public square. He painted himself as the bewildered, heartbroken husband ambushed by a greedy spouse and her predatory lawyer. Regarding Brielle Calloway, he was dismissive. "Miss Calloway is a brilliant and valued employee," he stated, his voice oozing false sincerity. "My wife, in her current state, has tragically misinterpreted a professional relationship. It's sad, really." He'd thrown Brielle under the bus, minimizing her to protect himself, a move that didn't go unnoticed. Brielle, who had been suspended with pay and told to keep quiet, saw her career and reputation dissolving in real time. Her calls to Gideon now went straight to voicemail. The most critical part of his defense was aimed at the intellectual property claim, which he called a desperate, baseless fantasy. Ophelia is a brilliant woman, but her academic work was purely theoretical, he told the journalist. To suggest it's the basis for Aura's multi-billion-dollar platform is frankly absurd and insulting to the hundreds of engineers who built this company. It's a work of fiction created by a lawyer looking for a bigger payday. For a few days, the strategy seemed to work. The narrative shifted slightly. The business world was more inclined to believe the self-made tech genius over the scorned wife. Gideon's bulldog lawyer, Frank Napier, filed a response motion accusing Ophelia of malicious intent and requesting the judge throw out the IP claim as frivolous. The battle lines were drawn in the press and in the courts. Gideon felt a sliver of his confidence return. He had weathered storms before. This was just another hostile takeover attempt, albeit a more personal one. He had once again completely underestimated his wife. Ophelia remained silent. She gave no interviews. She released no statements. She let Gideon's narrative play out, giving him enough rope to hang himself. While the world was debating the salacious details of the affair, she and Lorraine were moving with surgical precision. Their first move was to formally subpoena Robert Finch for a deposition. As expected, Frank Napier filed a motion to quash the subpoena, arguing that the company's CFO was irrelevant to a marital dispute. This was the trap Lorraine had set. "Your Honor," Lorraine argued in a preliminary hearing before a stern-faced judge in family court, "Mr. Napier claims our IP assertions are a work of fiction. Yet he seeks to block the testimony of the one man besides Mr. Price himself, who has first-hand knowledge of the company's financial and operational history from its inception. If the claim is so frivolous, what are they so afraid of?" Mr. Finch saying under oath. The judge, a woman known for her low tolerance for legal gamesmanship, agreed. The motion to quash was denied. Finch would testify. The second move was executed that same afternoon. An unmarked envelope was delivered by courier to Beatrice Fairfax at the Ledger. Inside was not a statement, but a single piece of paper, page 47, from the forensic analyst's report. It showed two columns of CUN. The left column was labeled Source C, Fairchild Thesis, MIT 2012. The right column was Source or Aura Dynamics AI, Core Version 2013. Even to a layperson, the connection was undeniable. The structure, the comments, the logic, it was virtually identical. Beatrice Fairfax, realizing she had a much bigger story than a salacious divorce, immediately put her top investigative tech reporter on it. The next day, the headline wasn't in the society column. It was on the front page of the business section. Aura of deceit, leaked document suggests tech giant's core IP may be based on founder's wife's academic work. The story was a bombshell. It wasn't about cheating anymore. It was about potential large-scale corporate fraud. The stock market reacted instantly. Aura Dynamics' stock, which had wobbled after the initial news, now plummeted. It dropped 50% in the first hour of trading, wiping out over $2 billion of market value. The board of directors, who had been content to let Gideon handle his domestic issue, were suddenly calling emergency meetings. Shareholders were panicking. The government agency that had awarded Aura the massive infrastructure contract announced it was monitoring the situation closely and reviewing the integrity of our procurement process. Gideon was trapped in a nightmare. His attempt to control the narrative had backfired spectacularly. By publicly denying the IP claim so vehemently, he had made the leak of page 47 10 times more damaging. He had called Ophelia a liar, and she had responded with cold, hard proof. He called an emergency meeting with Frank Napier and his legal team. The mood in the conference room was grim. "This is a disaster," Gideon seethed, throwing the newspaper onto the polished mahogany table. "How did they get this? Who is leaking?" "It doesn't matter how they got it, Gideon," Frank said, his usual bluster gone. "What matters is if it's true. Is that her code?" Gideon hesitated, a flicker of panic in his eyes. "It's adapted. It's inspired by maybe. But we built on it. We scaled it. We made it what it is." "That's not what the code says," Frank countered. "And that's not what Robert Finch is going to say in his deposition, is he?" The room fell silent. They all knew the answer. Robert Finch's conscience, combined with a legal subpoena, was a weapon of mass destruction aimed directly at Gideon. The pressure was mounting from all sides. The board issued a formal statement that they were forming a special committee to conduct a full independent review of the company's intellectual property origins. It was a vote of no confidence wrapped in polite corporate language. They were distancing themselves from him. Meanwhile, Ophelia made her next move. Through Lorraine, she proposed a settlement. It was bold, audacious, and utterly brilliant. She didn't ask for half his money. She asked for something far more valuable. The terms were simple. 1. 30% of Gideon's personal shares in Aura Dynamics to be transferred to her immediately. This would make her the second largest individual shareholder. 2. A permanent seat on the board of directors. 3. A public statement from Gideon and the board acknowledging her foundational contribution to the Aura and the official renaming of the core technology to the Fairchild Price predictive engine. A cash settlement of $50 million for her share of the marital assets. A figure that was almost insultingly low, designed to show this was never about the money. Frank Napier read the terms and actually laughed. "She's insane. He'll never agree to this. Giving her a board seat, renaming the tech. It's professional suicide." "Is it?" Lorraine responded coolly over the phone. "Or is it the only thing that will save his company?" The board is terrified. The shareholders are in revolt. The government is about to pull the biggest contract in your history. Ophelia is offering them a way out. A story of redemption. The brilliant, overlooked co-founder steps in to right the ship and restore integrity. She's not the woman who destroyed Aura Dynamics. She's the only woman who can save it. Present it to your client Frank and to the board. They're the ones who have the most to lose. Gideon was cornered. Fighting meant discovery depositions and the almost certain public testimony of Robert Finch, which would expose him as a fraud. The SEC would get involved. Lawsuits from shareholders would bury the company. He would lose everything. Settling on Ophelia's terms was a humiliation of a different kind. It was a public admission that he was a liar. It was ceding power to the woman he had dismissed and betrayed. He would have to sit across from her in board meetings for the rest of his life, a constant reminder of his downfall. His empire was burning down around him, and Ophelia wasn't holding a torch. She was holding a fire extinguisher, and the price of using it was his crown. The emergency board meeting of Aura Dynamics was held not in their gleaming corporate headquarters, but in the neutral, tomb-like conference room of a high-powered law firm. The air was frigid, both literally and figuratively. The 10 board members, a collection of venture capitalists, industry veterans, and one retired general, sat around a massive granite table, their faces grim. Gideon sat at the head of the table, but he no longer commanded it. He was a king presiding over his own abdication. Frank Napier, looking haggard, presented Ophelia's settlement offer. He tried to frame it as an outrageous act of extortion, but the board members were not fools. They had seen the stock ticker. They had fielded panicked calls from institutional investors. They had read the Aura of Deceit article and knew that the leak of page 47 was just the beginning. "This is unacceptable," Gideon blustered, trying to summon his old authority. "Giving her a board seat is tantamount to letting the enemy through the gates." It was then that an elderly, respected board member named Philip Kahn, a man who had backed Gideon from the start, spoke up. His voice was quiet, but it cut through Gideon's rage like a razor. "The enemy, Gideon, is not Ophelia," Philip said, looking at him with deep disappointment. "The enemy is the lie we're now trying to contain. Did you or did you not build this company on her uncredited work?" Gideon stared at him, his mouth opening and closing. The directness of the question in this public forum had shattered his last line of defense. "It's complicated," he stammered. "No, it's not," Philip countered. "Either you did or you didn't. And everything I'm seeing suggests you did. This settlement offer isn't an act of war. It's a lifeline. She's offering us a new narrative, a way to spin this disaster into a story of correction and justice. A story that saves the government contract and stabilizes the stock. She's giving us a way to save the company from you." The final 3 words hung in the air. From you. The betrayal was complete. His own board, the men and women he had made rich, were turning on him. They were choosing the company over its creator. The vote was a mere formality. It was 10-1. They accepted Ophelia's terms. Frank Napier was instructed to draw up the papers. Gideon sat in stunned silence, the architect of a shining city, now watching it being signed over to another ruler. A week later, the final meeting took place in Lorraine Adler's sterile, imposing office. It was the first time Gideon and Ophelia had been in the same room since the gala. Gideon was flanked by Frank Napier. Ophelia sat beside Lorraine, her posture erect, her expression unreadable. The room was filled with stacks of documents, the transfer of stocks, the legal agreements, the public statement to be released. Gideon signed each document with a stiff, angry scrawl. His signature, once a symbol of his power, was now an instrument of his surrender. When the last paper was signed, Lorraine and Frank began gathering their respective copies, their professional duty done. For a moment, Ophelia and Gideon were left in a bubble of silence. "Are you happy now?" Gideon said, his voice a low, bitter rasp. "You've ruined me." Ophelia looked at him, and for the first time she allowed a flicker of her true feelings to show. It wasn't triumph or glee. It was a profound, weary sadness. "You don't get it even now," she said softly. "I never wanted to ruin you, Gideon. I wanted you to see me, to respect me, to acknowledge what we built together. You were so busy building your own myth that you erased me from it. You erased us." She paused, letting the words sink in. This wasn't about revenge. This was a course correction. You think I've ruined you? No. I've just saved my half of the company from the man who was about to destroy it with his own ego. And Brielle? He sneered, a pathetic attempt to wound her. Was she part of the course correction too? Brielle was a casualty of your recklessness, Ophelia replied, her voice turning cold again. She made her choices, but you used her. You toasted her as the future to humiliate me, and then you discarded her when she became inconvenient. She was just another asset for you to leverage and then write off. Her ruin is entirely of your own making. With that, she stood up. The meeting was over. Her old life was over. The public announcement was released an hour later. It was a masterstroke of corporate power heavily influenced by Lorraine and Ophelia. It announced the settlement of the spousal dispute, and in the same breath, celebrated the newly revealed foundational contribution of co-founder Ophelia Fairchild. It spun the story as a long overdue correction of the historical record. It announced her appointment to the board and the renaming of the AI engine. It was clean, decisive, and it gave the market exactly what it needed: confidence and a positive new story. Aerodynamic stock stabilized, then began to climb. The government contract was secured. In the months that followed, the new reality set in. Ophelia Fairchild, no longer a price, became a formidable presence on the Aura board. She was quiet, whip-smart, and utterly ruthless in her analysis of the company's strategy. She didn't seek to undermine Gideon at every turn. She simply held him and the company to a higher standard. Her presence forced him to be better, sharper, and more honest than he had been in a decade. His power was diminished, checked by her mere presence. It was a prison of his own design. Gideon Price remained CEO, but he was a changed man. The charismatic swagger was gone, replaced by a more cautious, somber demeanor. He had to sit in board meetings and listen as the Fairchild Price predictive engine was discussed, a constant, humiliating reminder of his theft and his defeat. Brielle Calloway vanished from the tech scene. Blacklisted and disgraced, she became a cautionary tale whispered about at industry conferences. A brilliant young woman whose ambition had hitched itself to a falling star. Ophelia Fairchild, however, flourished. She didn't just reclaim her past, she built a new future. She used her position and her newfound wealth to launch a foundation dedicated to supporting women in STEM, ensuring that other brilliant minds would not have their work co-opted or erased. She was no longer a wife in the shadow of a great man. She was the woman who had built the table and then, when necessary, had taken her rightful seat at its head. She had not started the war, but she had, with chilling precision, won it. In the end, this wasn't just a story about a toast, a limo, and a set of divorce papers. It was a story about the quiet power of underestimation. Gideon Price saw his wife as a beautiful object, a relic of his past, and paid a devastating price for his blindness. Ophelia Fairchild Price reminded the world that the most formidable force isn't always the loudest voice in the room, but often the most prepared mind. She didn't just get revenge, she reclaimed her legacy, and in doing so secured her future and the future of the company she secretly founded. What do you think? Was Ophelia's move a brilliant act of justice or a cold, calculated takeover? Who was the real victim here, or were they all just players in a high-stakes game of power? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of resilience, strategy, and ultimate vindication resonated with you, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who needs a reminder of their own strength and worth. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss our next deep dive into stories where the truth is always more dramatic than fiction. In the hushed, manicured world of Willow Creek, where reputations are currency and secrets are poison, Margaret Lane was the perfect wife to a millionaire titan. She was graceful, intelligent, and impeccably silent. But when her husband Justin flaunted his affair at the town's most prestigious event, He fundamentally underestimated the woman he'd spent 15 years betraying. He expected tears. He expected a quiet, dignified retreat. What he got was a single, devastatingly public sign that didn't just expose his secret, it lit the fuse on a meticulously planned explosion that would bring his entire empire and the whole town's polite facade crashing down. This isn't just a story of heartbreak, it's a masterclass in revenge. The air in Willow Creek always seemed to carry the scent of money, a crisp, clean fragrance of freshly mown lawns, expensive perfume, and the subtle, underlying hum of ambition. It was a town built on success, a picture-perfect enclave where sprawling mansions hid behind ancient oak trees and wrought-iron gates. Here, image was everything, and the Lane family was royalty. Justin Lane was the king, a real estate magnate with a predator's smile and the kind of charisma that could sell sand in the desert. He had built his empire, Lane Holdings, from the ground up. He was a pillar of the community, his name etched onto plaques at the library, the hospital, and the local country club. And Margaret Lane was his perfect queen. To the outside world, she was the epitome of grace and quiet strength. An architect by training, she had set aside her own promising career to raise their two children, Liam and Chloe, and to curate the flawless public image that Justin's status demanded. Their home at 18 Willow Creek Lane wasn't just a house. It was a testament to her taste and his success, a sprawling Georgian manor that was frequently featured in glossy lifestyle magazines. It was also a cage, gilded and beautiful, but a cage nonetheless. For the past 2 years, the gold of the cage had begun to flake, revealing the cold iron beneath. It started with the little things. The late nights Justin explained away as investor dinners. The second phone that was always kept locked and out of sight. The scent of a perfume not hers that clung faintly to his suit jackets. Margaret wasn't naive. She was observant. She saw the way his eyes would glaze over when she spoke his attention already somewhere else. She noticed the private smirking texts that would light up his screen when he thought she wasn't looking. The whispers in town had started a few months ago, subtle at first, then growing more confident. Willow Creek was a piranha pool of gossip disguised as polite concern. Carol Ann, the resident queen bee of the country club, had made a comment over mimosas about seeing Justin's Bentley parked outside a trendy downtown apartment building, one not owned by his company. Margaret had simply smiled, a placid mask of disinterest, and changed the subject to the upcoming Founders Gala. The Founders Gala was the social event of the year, a black tie affair that brought out the entire town's elite to celebrate Willow Creek's founding, and more importantly, to reinforce their own place within its rigid hierarchy. It was an event the Lanes had chaired twice. This year, however, a chill had settled over the preparations in their home. A week before the gala, Justin had breezed into the kitchen, loosening his tie. He didn't kiss her hello anymore. About the gala, he'd said, pulling a bottle of sparkling water from the Sub-Zero fridge. I need you to sit this one out. Margaret had been arranging flowers, a mix of white hydrangeas and delicate delphiniums. She didn't stop her movements slow and deliberate. Oh, are you feeling unwell? She asked, her voice even. No, I'm fine. It's just a big night for the business. I'll be networking heavily. Some potential partners from Dubai are flying in. It's better if I go solo, keep things focused. The lie was so smooth, so practiced, it was almost impressive. Margaret snipped the stem of a hydrangea, the sound unnaturally loud in the silent kitchen. I see. You've never felt my presence hindered your business dealings before, Justin. In fact, I believe the last time you closed a major deal, it was over dinner with the Hendersons, a dinner I hosted. He sighed, the sound laced with impatience. Margaret, don't make this difficult. It's just one event. She finally turned to look at him, her eyes clear and unreadable. Of course, dear. Whatever you think is best for business. But Margaret knew. She knew it wasn't about business partners from Dubai. It was about Sienna Monroe. Sienna was everything Margaret wasn't. She was 26, a raven-haired, ambitious social media manager who had recently been hired to revitalize the Lane Holdings online brand. She was bold, brash, and had an Instagram feed filled with pouting selfies and luxury brand hashtags. Margaret had seen the charge on their joint American Express statement a month ago, a $12,000 Cartier love bracelet. It wasn't her birthday, it wasn't their anniversary, but a quick, painful scroll through Sienna's public profile had shown the bracelet gleaming on her wrist in a photo captioned, "Some girls just get lucky, Hajj blessed." Justin taking Sienna to the gala wasn't just an affair, it was a statement. He was tired of hiding. He was ready to trade in his classic elegant wife for a newer, shinier model, and he was going to do it on the town's biggest stage. It was the ultimate act of public humiliation, a clear signal to everyone in Willow Creek that Margaret Lane was being replaced. He thought she would crumble retreat into their cavernous home with her quiet dignity and her children, and eventually accept a quiet, tidy divorce. He had no idea that for Margaret, his decision wasn't an endpoint. It was a starting pistol. For the past year, ever since her suspicions had solidified into cold, hard certainty, Margaret had not been idle. She hadn't been crying into her pillow. She had been planning. Her initial shock and heartbreak had crystallized into something else entirely, a cold, focused rage. It wasn't just about the cheating, it was about the disrespect, the utter disregard for their 15 years of marriage, for the family they had built, for the sacrifices she had made. He was trying to erase her, to render her invisible. So Margaret had made a call, not to a divorce lawyer, not yet. Her first call was to a man named David Chen, a forensic accountant she'd been introduced to by a friend from her university days. Her second was to a discreet private investigator. While Justin was whining and dining, his mistress, Margaret, was poring over bank statements, Shell Corporation documents, and offshore account numbers. She was a woman who had designed buildings, who understood that a strong structure required a flawless foundation. She was now methodically cataloguing every crack, every weakness in the foundation of Justin Lane's empire. The week leading up to the gala was a masterpiece of controlled performance. Margaret played the part of the slightly wounded but understanding wife perfectly. She helped Liam with his calculus homework, attended Chloe's soccer game, and hosted a small book club meeting. She smiled, she laughed, she engaged. But beneath the surface, a different plan was clicking into place. She made several phone calls, finalizing arrangements with a calm precision that would have terrified Justin had he known. One was to a local media strategist. Another was to a billboard advertising company. On the evening of the gala, Justin stood before the hall mirror, adjusting his bow tie. He wore a custom Tom Ford tuxedo. He looked every bit the king of Willow Creek. "You're sure you'll be all right?" he asked, his voice laced with false concern. "Liam and Chloe are with your mother." "Yes, they're fine. She's taking them to the movies," Margaret replied from the doorway of their master bedroom. She was dressed in simple silk pajamas, looking serene. "You look very handsome, Justin. Have a wonderful time. Network well." He gave her a brief, dismissive nod. "I will. Don't wait up." He walked out the door, the engine of his Aston Martin roaring to life a moment later. He was on his way to pick up Sienna, to parade her in front of their friends, their colleagues, their entire world. Margaret walked over to the large bay window overlooking the driveway, watching the red taillights disappear down Willow Creek Lane. The house was silent. The air was still. She felt a tremor of nerves, but it was quickly suppressed by a wave of cold resolve. She picked up her phone, not the one Justin knew about, but a clean prepaid burner phone. She sent a single text message to a number she had memorized. "Green light. Execute now." She then walked downstairs, poured herself a glass of expensive scotch, Justin's favorite, a Macallan 25, and sat down in the dark living room. She wasn't going to the gala. She didn't need to. Her show was about to begin, and the entire town of Willow Creek had a front row seat. The Willow Creek Country Club was ablaze with light, a beacon of opulence against the darkening sky. Valets in crisp red jackets scurried to open the doors of arriving luxury cars, while inside the murmur of the town's elite filled the grand ballroom. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto a sea of tuxedos and designer gowns. The air was thick with the clinking of champagne flutes and the practiced laughter of people who knew their every move was being watched. When Justin Lane arrived, a hush fell over the room, followed by a wave of excited whispers. It wasn't just his presence that commanded attention, but who was on his arm. Sienna Monroe was a vision in a daring blood-red gown with a slit that ran dangerously high up her thigh. The Cartier bracelet gleamed under the lights. She clung to Justin's arm, her smile a mixture of triumph and nervous excitement. She was making her debut, staking her claim. Justin, for his part, was the picture of confidence. He navigated the room with a regal air, accepting backpats and handshakes. He knew they were all looking. He knew they were all talking. He wanted them to. This was a power move. This was him, Justin Lane, rewriting his own narrative in real time. He caught the eye of Carol Ann, who was standing with a small clutch of women, her mouth agape. He gave her a slow, deliberate wink. "Justin, you have some nerve," his business partner Marcus Thorne muttered as he approached, a glass of whiskey in hand. "Where's Margaret?" "Feeling a bit under the weather tonight," Justin said smoothly, placing a proprietary hand on the small of Sienna's back. "Marcus, I'd like you to meet Sienna Monroe, our new head of digital marketing. Sienna, this is Marcus Thorne, my right-hand man." Sienna offered a dazzling smile. "A pleasure to meet you. I've heard so much about you." Marcus gave her a curt nod, his eyes flicking back to Justin. The look was one of disbelief and a warning. But Justin ignored it. He was invincible tonight. For the first hour, the gala proceeded as planned. Speeches were made, donations were pledged, and the gossip flowed as freely as the champagne. Justin and Sienna were the undeniable center of gravity, a vortex of scandal and speculation. People approached them with wide, fake smiles, their eyes darting between the millionaire and his young companion, hungry for details. Meanwhile, 3 miles away, in the velvet darkness of her living room, Margaret took a slow sip of her scotch. The liquid burned a clean, satisfying path down her throat. Her phone lay dark on the polished mahogany table beside her. She had given her instructions. Now all she had to do was wait. She had calculated the timing perfectly. She knew the rhythm of the gala, the cocktail hour, the opening remarks, the dinner service. The prime moment for maximum impact would be just as people were settling at their tables, phones momentarily emerging from pockets and purses before being put away for the main course. Back at the country club, the mayor was droning on from the podium about community spirit. A few attendees, bored with the speech, discreetly checked their phones. The first to see it was a junior real estate agent from a rival firm. His eyes widened. He quickly nudged his colleague, showing him the screen. A text message had just come in from a friend. "Dude, have you seen the billboard on Route 7? A silent digital wildfire began to spread through the ballroom. Phones initially hidden under napkins were now being passed from hand to hand under the tables. A ripple of gasps and shocked murmurs began to compete with the mayor's speech. Carol Ann's phone buzzed with a message from her daughter. It was a picture. Her perfectly made-up face went pale. She grabbed her husband's arm, her painted nails digging into his sleeve. "Oh my God, Robert, look!" Justin, seated at the head table, with Sienna preening beside him, noticed the shift in the room's atmosphere. The ambient buzz of conversation had changed, acquiring a frantic, charged edge. People were no longer looking at him with clandestine awe, but with something else, a mixture of pity, shock, and rapturous Schadenfreude-fueled glee. His phone vibrated in his pocket. It was Marcus. He ignored it. Then it vibrated again. And again. A text from his lawyer. A text from his PR head. Dozens of messages poured in. Sienna noticed it too. The admiring glances had turned into stares and whispers. "What's going on?" she murmured to Justin, her smile faltering. "Why is everyone looking at us like that?" With a growing sense of dread, Justin pulled out his phone. The screen was a cascade of notifications. He clicked on the latest message from Marcus. It contained a single image taken from a car, slightly blurry but utterly horrifyingly clear. It was the main digital billboard on Route 7, the largest and most visible advertising space in the entire county, the one that every single gala attendee would have passed on their way to the club. For the past week, it had been advertising the new Mercedes S-Class. Now it displayed something else entirely. Against a stark white background in enormous, elegant black letters, a font Margaret herself had chosen. A classic serif that was both beautiful and brutal was a message. Thinking of buying a property from Justin Lane. So was his mistress, Sienna Monroe. Ask him about the private terms he offered her on our family home at 18 Willow Creek Lane. Margaret Lane. Every sound in the world seemed to drain away for Justin. The blood rushed from his face, leaving a cold, clammy hollowness. He saw it all in an instant. The name's his name, Sienna's name, in 20-foot-high letters for the entire world to see. He saw the cunning, surgical precision of the words. It didn't just scream adultery. It slyly implied financial impropriety, a breach of fiduciary duty. Private terms. It was a phrase that would set the minds of investors and business partners racing. And then, the final devastating blow, the address. Their address. An open invitation for the media, the curious, the scorned to descend upon their home. His sanctuary. He looked at Sienna. The colour had drained from her face as she too read the message on a nearby guest's phone. The triumphant smile was gone, replaced by a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. Her social debut had just become a public execution. The mayor on stage had finally finished his speech, utterly oblivious. He ended with a flourish. "And let's give a big hand to one of our community's greatest supporters, Mr. Justin Lane." A smattering of confused, half-hearted applause broke out. But most of the room was silent, every single eye fixed on Justin. He felt 1,000 invisible knives piercing his skin. He was no longer a king in his castle. He was a spectacle, a clown in a spotlight he couldn't escape. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He grabbed Sienna's arm, his grip far too tight. "We're leaving." He didn't walk, he fled. He pulled a terrified Sienna behind him, pushing through the stunned crowd. The whispers now followed him, like a physical force, a wave of judgment and mockery. He could feel their stares on his back. As he burst through the ballroom doors and into the grand foyer, he fumbled for his valet ticket. He didn't want his car. He wanted to disappear. But there was no escape. Margaret had made sure of that. The trap had been sprung, and he was standing right in the middle of it. The humiliation was just the beginning. This wasn't an emotional outburst from a scorned wife. This was an attack. This was war. And he had just realized with sickening certainty that he was completely and utterly unprepared. The drive from the country club to 18 Willow Creek Lane was a blur of fury and panic for Justin. He gripped the steering wheel of the Aston Martin so hard his knuckles were white to the engine, a high-pitched scream that mirrored the chaos in his mind. Beside him, Sienna was sobbing, a series of hitched, desperate gasps. How could she do this? Sienna wailed, her mascara tracing black rivers down her cheeks. My name is up there for everyone to see. Justin, you have to fix this. You have to call your lawyers and get it taken down. You think I'm not trying? He snarled, stabbing at his phone with one hand, trying to get some through to his attorney, his P-team, anyone. Every call went to voicemail. They were either already inundated or screening his calls. The billboard, the address. Margaret had weaponized their home. As they turned onto their street, the full scope of Margaret's opening salvo became terrifyingly clear. The quiet, tree-lined lane was anything but. A handful of cars were already parked haphazardly along the curb. The unmistakable van of a local news channel was setting up its satellite dish aimed at the sky. A few neighbors were standing on their lawns pretending to inspect their rose bushes while their eyes were glued to the Lane mansion. "Oh my God," Sienna breathed, shrinking down in her seat. "They're here already." Justin slammed on the brakes in the driveway, the tires crunching on the gravel. The grand facade of his home, usually a symbol of his power, now felt like the scene of a crime. The warm lights glowing in the windows seemed to mock him. He stormed out of the car, leaving Sienna to scramble after him. "Margaret!" he bellowed, bursting through the front door. "Margaret!" He found her in the living room. The room was dark, save for a single lamp casting a soft glow on the armchair where she sat. The Macallan 25 sat on the table beside her, the glass half empty. She didn't look up immediately, taking another slow, deliberate sip before placing the glass down with a quiet click. "Justin," she said, her voice unnervingly calm, "you're home early. I take it the gala didn't go as planned?" The sight of her so placid and in control sent a fresh wave of rage through him. "What have you done?" he hissed, his voice trembling with fury. "A billboard. You put up a billboard to humiliate me, to humiliate her." He gestured wildly toward the front door, where Sienna hovered, looking lost and terrified. Margaret finally raised her eyes to meet his. There was no fear in them, no tears, only a glacial calm that chilled him to the bone. "Humiliate you," she repeated softly. "No, Justin. Humiliation is taking your 26-year-old mistress to an event you knew I wanted to attend, expecting me to sit at home and weep. This," she said with a slight, almost imperceptible gesture, "is a public relations strategy. Something Sienna, as your head of digital marketing, should appreciate." Sienna flinched as if struck. You bitch," she stammered. Margaret's gaze shifted to Sienna for the first time, cool and dismissive. "You are a guest in my home. I suggest you hold your tongue. You are collateral damage in a war you were naive enough to think you had a stake in. You are not a player here. You are a pawn, and you've just been sacrificed." Turning her attention back to Justin, Margaret's voice hardened. "You thought you could discard me like a piece of outdated furniture. You thought my silence was weakness. You miscalculated." "I will ruin you for this," Justin roared, taking a step forward. "I will have that sign taken down, and then I will take you to court, and I will take everything. The house, the kids, everything." "No, you won't," Margaret said, her voice dropping to an icy whisper. She reached down beside her chair and picked up a thick navy blue folder. She slid it across the polished surface of the coffee table. It landed with a soft final thud. "You see, Justin, the billboard was just the appetizer. That was for the town. This," she nodded at the folder, "is for you." Justin stared at the folder, as if it were a venomous snake. His hands shook as he reached for it. He flipped it open. The top page was a petition for divorce. Irreconcilable differences that he expected. But as he leafed through the pages, his blood ran cold. It wasn't just a divorce filing. It was a meticulously compiled dossier of his life. Bank statements from accounts he thought were hidden, flight manifests and hotel receipts detailing his trips with Sienna, sworn affidavits from the private investigator who had been tailing him for months. And then came the worst part. Behind the infidelity evidence was another section, title deeds to properties held by shell corporations, printouts of encrypted emails between him and Marcus Thorne discussing creative accounting on the new waterfront development project. A detailed analysis prepared by a forensic accountant tracing a pattern of tax evasion and potential fraud stretching back 5 years. He looked up at her, his face ashen. The sheer scale of it, the cold, calculating precision, was breathtaking. This wasn't the work of a few weeks. This was a year-long clandestine operation conducted from right under his nose. "How?" He whispered the single word, a breath of defeat. "You were careless," Margaret said simply. "You underestimated me. You assumed the woman who ran your household and raised your children had no head for business. You forgot I designed buildings, Justin. I understand structure, and I know how to find the load-bearing walls. You, my dear husband, are a house of cards. She stood up, her composure absolute. My lawyer, David Chen, will be in touch with your lawyer in the morning. I'd advise you to hire a good one, not just for the divorce, but for the SEC investigation that will likely follow once certain documents are anonymously forwarded to the correct authorities. She paused at the foot of the grand staircase. Oh, and Justin, I've already had the locks changed on the master bedroom. You and your guest can use one of the spare rooms. I'd suggest you get some rest. It seems you have a very difficult day ahead of you. With that, she turned and ascended the stairs, her back straight, her steps unhurried. She didn't look back. Justin sank onto the sofa, the folder slipping from his nerveless fingers, its contents spilling across the floor. He stared at the damning evidence of his own destruction. The public sign had been a devastating blow to his ego. But this was an annihilation of his entire world. The king of Willow Creek had been checkmated by his quiet, unassuming queen, and the game was only just beginning. Sienna stood frozen in the doorway, the reality crashing down on her. She wasn't the next Mrs. Lane. She was just the girl in the red dress, caught in the wreckage of a war she never even knew was being waged. The day after the gala, a funereal quiet hung over 18 Willow Creek Lane. The news trucks had multiplied overnight, forming a grim, expectant cordon at the end of the street. The billboard on Route 7 was still there, a monument to Justin's folly, as his lawyers frantically tried to navigate the contractual labyrinth of a prepaid multi-day ad buy Margaret's media strategist had cleverly locked in. Justin had spent a sleepless night in a guest room that felt colder and more alien than any hotel. Sienna, after a hysterical, blame-filled argument, had called a cab in the pre-dawn hours and vanished, leaving behind only the faint scent of her perfume and the scarlet stain of her lipstick on a discarded tissue. He was alone, trapped in his own home, the architect of his own ruin. Upstairs in the master suite, Margaret was the picture of productivity. She had woken at her usual time, done a 30-minute yoga session, and was now on a conference call with her legal team. The initial offer from his side will be bluster and threats. David, she said, her voice crisp as she paced the length of her walk-in closet. He'll try to paint me as vindictive and unstable, using the billboard as proof. On the other end of the line, David Chen, a man whose calm demeanor belied a mind as sharp as a scalpel, chuckled softly. Let him. The billboard was a calculated risk, Margaret, and it paid off beautifully. It's framed the narrative. You're not a gold digger. You're a woman who was publicly scorned. It gives us the moral high ground. More importantly, it rattled him so badly, he won't be thinking clearly. And the other documents? Margaret asked, pausing to look at the sealed manila envelope on her dressing table. The insurance policy is ready, David confirmed. We have a trusted courier. If Justin even hints at playing hardball with custody or trying to hide assets, a duplicate of that folder lands on the desk of the U.S. Attorney's office. He'll get a call from his lawyer, who will get a call from me, explaining the concept of mutually assured destruction. He won't fight, Margaret. He can't afford to. This was the deeper game. The plan Margaret had spent a year constructing was not born of a single moment of anger, but of a slow, painful awakening. It began 18 months prior, not with the discovery of Sienna, but with a piece of mail. A notice from a bank she didn't recognize for an account she didn't know existed, mistakenly delivered to their home address instead of Justin's private post office box. It was for a small fortune sitting in a Cayman Islands account. Her first instinct was to confront him, to scream, to cry, to demand an explanation. But her architect's mind, the part of her that saw systems and structures, took over. Confrontation would only make him more careful. So she said nothing. Instead, she began to dig. She remembered her old college friend, Amelia, whose messy divorce had involved a forensic accountant. That's how she found David Chen. Their first meeting took place in a sterile, anonymous coffee shop miles from Willow Creek. "He thinks I'm just a housewife," Margaret had told David, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea. "He thinks all I do is plan charity events and manage the children's schedules. He's forgotten who I was before I met him." David had listened patiently as she laid out her suspicions. He wasn't interested in the affair. That was for a different kind of lawyer. He was interested in the numbers. "If he's hiding this, he's hiding other things," he'd said. "Men like Justin Lane don't build empires without cutting corners. Our job is to find out where." And so began Margaret's double life. By day, she was the perfect Willow Creek wife. By night, after Justin was asleep or away on one of his business trips, she became a detective in her own home. She used her knowledge of his habits, his passwords, the name of his first dog, a detail he'd drunkenly shared years ago and long since forgotten to access his private computer, the one he thought was so secure. The trail she uncovered was more complex and corrupt than she could have ever imagined. It wasn't just one offshore account. It was a web of shell corporations registered in places like Panama and Delaware, used to launder money and hide profits from Lane Holdings. She found the emails with Marcus Thorne, their partner in crime. They discussed overinflating construction costs on publicly subsidized projects, kicking back money to themselves, and creating fraudulent invoices to deceive the IRS. Every piece of evidence was copied onto an encrypted hard drive which she kept in a safe deposit box 2 towns over. She learned about burner phones and virtual private networks. She transformed from a betrayed wife into a master of espionage. The affair with Sienna, when she finally confirmed it, was almost incidental. It was no longer the primary wound. It was merely the symptom of a deeper sickness, a rot of deceit that ran through every aspect of Justin's life. It was what gave her the final steely resolve to not just leave him, but to dismantle him. The billboard had been David's idea, a stroke of strategic genius. "We can't just leak the financial documents," he'd explained. "It has to come after a public provocation. Otherwise, you look like the aggressor. He needs to throw the first public punch." His affair flaunted at the gala is that punch. Our response, the billboard, is the counterpunch. It makes his crime public, and our reaction, however extreme, seem justified. It seizes control of the story. Now, as the fallout rained down on Justin, Margaret's plan moved into its next phase. Justin, as predicted, was making frantic calls. He cold-called Marcus Thorne first. "You need to fix this." "Justin," Marcus barked over the phone, "my name is all over those emails she found. How the hell did she find them?" "I don't know." Justin paced the guest room like a caged animal. "She was planning this for months, maybe longer. We need to get ahead of it. We need a story." "There is no story, you idiot," Marcus shouted. "You brought your girlfriend to the gala. You handed her a motive on a silver platter. If those documents get out, we're not just ruined, we're going to prison." Justin's blood ran cold. Prison. The word hung in the air, unimaginable, and yet suddenly terrifyingly real. His next call was to his lawyer, a bulldog named Arthur Fleming. Arthur's advice was grim. "Don't talk to her. Don't threaten her. Don't do anything until I speak to this David Chen. From what you've told me, she holds all the cards, Justin. All of them. Our first priority isn't winning, it's damage control. We need to find out what she wants." What Margaret wanted was simple, a clean break, full custody of the children. The house and a financial settlement so significant it would not only secure her and her children's futures, but would also permanently cripple Lane Holdings. She didn't just want a divorce, she wanted restitution. She wanted to reclaim the years she had invested, the career she had sacrificed, and the dignity he had tried to strip from her. Later that afternoon, David Chen called her back. "Arthur Fleming is a smart man," he said. "He's not making threats. He's asking for a meeting. He knows he's been outmaneuvered. Justin's empire is leveraged to the hilt, Margaret. The bank covenants on his major loans will have character clauses. A public scandal, let alone an SEC investigation, could cause the banks to call in their loans. He's facing a complete financial collapse. Margaret looked out the window. The news vans were still there. The whole town was watching, waiting. They thought this was about a cheating husband and a vengeful wife. They had no idea about the deeper game that was being played, about the secrets buried deep in the foundations of Justin's glittering kingdom. The billboard hadn't just been a sign, it had been a wrecking ball aimed squarely at those foundations. And now, the entire structure was beginning to tremble. The week that followed the gala was a slow-motion demolition of Justin Lane's life. The billboard stayed up for its full, glorious 3-day run, a constant, humiliating reminder of his transgressions. The story was picked up by national news outlets, framed as a sensational tale of a scorned wife's epic revenge. The name Margaret Lane became a trending topic, a symbol of female empowerment for some and a terrifying cautionary tale for cheating husbands everywhere. But the real damage was happening far from the public eye in the sterile quiet of lawyers' offices and corporate boardrooms. The meeting between David Chen and Arthur Fleming was short and brutal. Arthur, accustomed to aggressive negotiation and blustering tactics, found himself completely stonewalled. David didn't negotiate. He dictated terms. "Here is the settlement offer," David said, sliding a single sheet of paper across the polished mahogany table. "Margaret gets the house at 18 Willow Creek Lane free and clear. She gets sole physical and legal custody of the children, with supervised visitation for Justin at her discretion. She will receive a lump sum payment of $60 million transferred from a list of pre-approved, legitimate accounts within 30 days. Furthermore, Lane Holdings will be professionally valuated, and she will receive a 40% stake in the company placed in a blind trust for her and the children." Arthur Fleming nearly choked on his coffee. That's absurd. That's not a settlement. That's a corporate takeover. He'll be ruined." David Chen leaned back in his chair, his expression unchanged. "He is already ruined, Arthur. The only question is whether his ruin is merely financial or if it includes a federal prison sentence. My client has in her possession documents that would interest not only the SEC, but the IRS and the District Attorney's Office. Those documents detail racketeering, tax fraud, and embezzlement. Marcus Thorne's name features prominently." He paused, letting the implication hang in the air. "Agree to these terms, and those documents remain in a vault. Fight us, and they will be delivered via courier tomorrow morning. The choice is Justin's. But I would remind him it's a choice Marcus will be very interested in." The threat was clear. It wasn't just Margaret he had to worry about. It was his own partner, who would do anything to save himself, including testifying against Justin. Checkmate. When Arthur relayed the terms to Justin, the magnate finally broke. The rage and bluster evaporated, replaced by the hollow shell of a man staring into the abyss. He had no choice. He agreed to everything. The first domino had fallen. The others followed in rapid succession. The board of directors of the charitable foundation he chaired called an emergency meeting and quietly requested his resignation. The country club, under pressure from influential members, led ironically by a sanctimonious Carol Ann, suspended his membership indefinitely. Business partners, who had once clamored for his attention, were now screening his calls. The partners from Dubai had never existed, but his very real investors from New York and Chicago were suddenly demanding audits and clarification on the creative accounting rumors that were now swirling like vultures. The empire of Lane Holdings began to bleed. The brand, once synonymous with success and luxury, was now tainted by scandal. Property sales stalled. Stock prices dipped. The banks, just as David had predicted, began making nervous inquiries about the stability of their loans. Justin was forced to start liquidating assets at a loss simply to cover the immediate costs of his divorce settlement and legal fees. Meanwhile, Sienna Monroe was experiencing her own personal apocalypse. Fired from her job at Lane Holdings for conduct unbecoming of an employee, she found herself a pariah. Her name and face had been plastered everywhere. She was the subject of vicious online trolling. The luxury brands that had once sent her free products now wanted nothing to do with her. The influencer career she had so carefully cultivated was destroyed overnight. Her attempts to secure a new job were met with polite but firm rejections. No one wanted to be associated with the scandal. Broke and desperate, she made one last humiliating attempt to salvage something from the wreckage. She found Margaret's private cell phone number through a mutual acquaintance and called it. Margaret answered on the second ring. "Hello, Margaret. It's Sienna Monroe." Her voice was small, stripped of all its former confidence. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "What do you want, Sienna?" Margaret's voice was not angry, but it was devoid of warmth. I wanted to say, I'm sorry," Sienna stammered. "I was a fool. I believed him. He told me he was leaving you, that we had a future. I never meant to hurt your children." "You were a symptom, Sienna, not the disease," Margaret said, her tone clinical. "You wanted the money and the status, and you were willing to overlook the cost to my family. I can't find it in myself to feel sorry for you. You made your choices." "But I've lost everything," Sienna cried, tears starting to flow. "My job, my reputation. I can't even pay my rent. Justin won't take my calls. I thought maybe you could understand." "Understanding and absolution are two very different things," Margaret replied coolly. "You were a willing participant in my husband's deception. The consequences of that are your own to bear. Do not contact me again." The line went dead. Sienna stared at her phone, the finality of Margaret's words echoing in the silence of her tiny apartment. There would be no help, no sympathy. She was truly on her own. Margaret Lane was not in the business of forgiveness. She was in the business of justice. The final domino to fall was Marcus Thorne. Terrified of the documents Margaret held, he did exactly what David Chen had predicted. He hired his own lawyer and approached the DA's office, offering to cooperate fully in an investigation into Lane Holdings in exchange for immunity. He threw Justin under the bus to save himself. The news broke a month later. Justin Lane, already a social pariah, was now officially under federal investigation for financial crimes. His assets were frozen. His company was placed into receivership. The king had not only been dethroned, his entire kingdom was being dismantled, brick by fraudulent brick. Margaret watched the news report on television from the comfort of her living room. Her living room. The divorce was finalized. The money was in the bank. The children were upstairs asleep in their beds, safe and secure. She felt a quiet, profound sense of finality. It was over. She had taken a man who tried to erase her, and had instead methodically and completely erased him from her life and from the pedestal of power he so arrogantly occupied. The town of Willow Creek was stunned not just by the scandal, but by the quiet, formidable power of the woman they had also tragically underestimated. 6 months later, the dust in Willow Creek had begun to settle, revealing a landscape irrevocably altered. The name Justin Lane, once spoken with reverence, was now uttered only in hushed, cautionary tones. His trial was pending, a foregone conclusion given Marcus Thorne's detailed testimony. He had sold his remaining assets, including his beloved Aston Martin and his collection of expensive watches, to pay his mounting legal bills. He now lived in a small rented condo on the other side of town, a ghost haunting the edges of the world he once ruled. The few times he was seen in public, he looked like a different man, gaunt, stooped, with the haunted eyes of someone who had lost everything and knew with bitter clarity that he had no one to blame but himself. In stark contrast, Margaret Lane was thriving. The house at 18 Willow Creek Lane, once her gilded cage, had been transformed. She had redecorated, replacing Justin's heavy masculine furniture with lighter, more modern pieces. The air inside seemed fresher, filled with the sound of her children's laughter instead of unspoken tensions. The news vans were long gone, replaced by the cars of mothers dropping off their kids for playdates with Liam and Chloe. The women of Willow Creek now looked at Margaret with a new kind of respect, one that bordered on awe. They had witnessed her public humiliation and her subsequent staggering victory. She was no longer just Justin Lane's wife. She was Margaret Lane, the woman who had brought down a king. When Carol Ann saw her at the local market, she no longer offered pitying smiles, but a genuine, "Hello, Margaret. You're looking wonderful." Margaret had not only won her one, she had won the respect of the very people Justin had intended to humiliate her in front of. But Margaret's victory was not defined by their approval or by Justin's demise. It was defined by her own resurgence. With her financial future secure, she had turned her attention back to her first love, architecture. She didn't need to work, but she wanted to. The part of her that had been dormant for 15 years, the creator, the designer, the builder, was awake and demanding expression. She founded her own boutique firm, Lane Design and Architecture, defiantly keeping the name but imbuing it with her own identity. Her first project was not a lavish mansion or a corporate high-rise. It was a pro bono project to redesign the outdated and underfunded Willow Creek Community Center. She poured her energy into creating a space that was beautiful, functional, and welcoming to all. It's so stark contrast to the exclusive gated world of the country club. She worked from a bright, airy office she had designed in what used to be Justin's home study. Blueprints and sketches covered the walls where his hunting trophies had once hung. She was in her element, her mind sharp, her purpose clear. She was building again, not just with steel and glass, but with the bricks of her own reclaimed life. One crisp autumn afternoon, she was on the construction site of the new community center, a hard hat perched on her head, discussing a structural change with the foreman. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from her son Liam. It was a picture of his acceptance letter to his first-choice university, a program in engineering. Below the image he had written, "Couldn't have done it without you, Mum. You taught me how to build things strong." Tears welled in Margaret's eyes, not tears of sadness or anger, but of profound, overwhelming gratitude. This was the true victory. Not the money, not the revenge, but this. Her children were happy and thriving. She was respected not for her husband's success, but for her own strength and talent. She had faced the darkest chapter of her life and had not only survived, but had emerged stronger, more authentic, and more powerful than ever before. She looked around at the rising frame of the community center, a skeleton of steel beams against the blue scumwing. It was a symbol of her new life, a structure built on a solid, honest foundation, designed to serve a purpose greater than just herself. She had torn down the house of cards Justin had built and was now constructing something real and lasting in its place. The whole town had been stunned by the wife's public sign. But the real story, the one that would be whispered in Willow Creek for years to come, was not about the sign on the billboard. It was about the woman who put it there, the architect who had so masterfully designed her own liberation, proving that the quietest person in the room is often the most powerful. Margaret Lane had finally built a life where she was the sole architect, and the view from the top was beautiful. Margaret's story is a powerful reminder that strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet, meticulous planning that creates the biggest impact. It's a story about reclaiming your power, rewriting your narrative, and refusing to be erased. She turned her pain into a plan and her betrayal into a blueprint for a new life, proving that the best revenge isn't just living well, it's strategically dismantling the empire of those who wronged you and building your own in its place. If you were moved by Margaret's journey from a silent wife to an unstoppable force, Please show your support by hitting that like button. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder of their own inner strength. And for more stories of incredible resilience and dramatic real-life sagas, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell. Let us know in the comments what you think. Was Margaret a hero, or did she go too far? We can't wait to hear from you.